And good to hear your voice, and good to hear the voice of our brother Lawrence Fishburne channeling that very real letter that was written, that reparations letter. What moved you to have us open with that, as the Egyptians would say, Medu Nefer, good speech?
Well, we've been talking about reparations, and what better framing than to actually hear from the voice of someone who was enslaved,
That's right.
and how even an enslaved person who's supposed to be, chattel and animal, could assess that there was something inherently wrong about not being paid for all that labor, and to
Mm.
be able to do the math of the thing in real time, and also talk about the dignity and respect of being treated like a human being in this other place. Why That's why I'm not coming back there. You tried to shoot me. But also found Larry Crow did a breakdown of this. Did you know that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm
Well,
gonna
well, remember the letter was written from his hometown, from Dayton.
stay in Ohio, right? So I'm gonna drop in Nubia in the chat. Larry Crow, Baba Crow's breakdown, where there was a Q&A with him around this letter, that kind of gives us chapter and verse. So I just dropped that for the Nubians. Good morning.
Good
And
morning. Good morning.
yeah, yes,
That-
I thought it would. And plus Lawrence Fishburne. That's it. Plus him. Yeah.
it's funny, in this vast existence that we move through called life, how it's always very striking how intimate the connections are. We know that the center of life is relationships. There is no humanity without relationships. I mean, two relationships created us. We didn't have anything to do with it, right? The fundamental unit isn't one, but two. And so,
Mm.
in the broad constellation that we live in, the way that the relationships reveal themselves when we'll just simply pay attention, as the Egyptians would say, sejem, listen, just reinforces that everything is in divine order. As you always say, we don't lay out a framework for our conversations. We kind of enter them, and in the rhythm of that we've kind of developed as things unfold over the arc of the days that transpire between when we're together, things present themselves that continue to build our momentum. You didn't, I mean, here's Larry Crow having done this work. Here's Larry Fishburne having read that letter from a brother from Dayton. And here's Lawrence Fishburne, who, of course, played DAP in School Days, which, according to this rather ham fisted cobbling of what quote unquote Freaknik was one of the impetus for what became Freaknik. And I think all of this is going to converge as you spend a little time with some of our cultural meaning makers over in Brooklyn at the great Medgar Evers College, and our sister Dr. Brenda Green at the Black Writers Conference this morning. But the convergences are there, as we'll see them unfold as we had this conversation. But everything's in divine order.
Let me say this too. For people who, I had some amazing conversations this week on Sirius XM.
Mm-hmm.
And one in particular was with Drew McCaskill, who, among other things, is at LinkedIn. And he did a master class on LinkedIn on Tuesday. But what he said was something powerful. Young people come in, and because he's on television now and he's doing all these things, they want to do what he's doing. And he said, I have 20 years in this business doing this at this level, that level. I learned from here. I was at Nielsen's for as an executive. I have it's like you don't wake up, and I was having this conversation yesterday because there's all of I said, what is the impetus for young people to study when you have, for example, Angel Reese has an NIL deal that pays her $2 million a year.
Right.
She didn't even have to go to the W. She didn't have to do anything but play college basketball, and she's good, and then go on with her life. If she's wise with the $2 million she's getting over the next 2 years, right, she may not ever have to work again. So what's the impetus for her to study, to go to school, even to, beyond basketball? There are people on OnlyFans right now. I was talking about the girl that said, Bad Barbie, Catch Me Outside on Dr. Phil. Her claim to fame was being a disrespectful young person who couldn't be controlled. Now she is worth $50 million. I don't know if the child can read a book. I don't know if she knows anything about history or anything important.
That's right.
But she got $50 million that she's sitting on. And I was like, how do you tell a young person today that this kind of scholarship, this work, this sitting in the soil, this, overtime tertiary knowledge is important, right? And then here you and I sit, we never have to talk before we come on because we both are sitting on 30 years of things done, people known, books read. And so when we have a conversation with the same spirit, with the same intention, because we have a future vision for what the world needs to look like. And both of us are committed to being responsible to usher that in our way.
Yeah.
You can't just get up and turn on the record button if you don't have this, you know what I'm saying? So
you can, hence our clean glasses of water commitment.
Here we are, right? Because there's so many people cosplaying at being journalists, at being scholars, at being purveyors of truth, because there's commerce in it.
Right.
So you figure out the algorithm and you trick the algorithm.
Right.
But we're here, algorithm being defied. Now, yeah, hit the like button, do your duty if you're here on the YouTube side. But and if you're a newbie, jump over and just hit the like button on YouTube because we gotta let them know.
No question.
But the reality is we're not here on some manufactured steam. This is time put in that you can't pretend or
pretend. Yeah, it's funny. In the same borough of Brooklyn, back in 1996. So 96, 06, 16, 26, 28 years ago, this coming week, it was the 26th of March, was the quote unquote debate that UT's lead moderated between John Henry Clark, Mary Lefkowitz, who was arguing that the Egyptians weren't black, and some other foolishness, doesn't know enough to spell her own name, much less anything about ancient Egypt. Martin Bernal, the late Martin Bernal at the time, and Guy McLean Rogers. And she turns to Dr. Clark first for opening remarks. And Clark says famously, and many people who quote him only quote the last part, and they shouldn't. So let's just get this down for the record, because Clark says, I'm not here to debate with anyone. It's the first thing he says. He says, I have devoted all of my adult life to the subject. I only debate with my equals. All others I teach. And so people love that last line. I only debate my equals. No. You're missing the most important part. I'm not here to debate. And then the sentence is, I have devoted my entire life to the subject. So the point that you're raising, people, I only debate. Slow your roll. How long have you been talking about this? Okay, so you got a bunch of hip hop artists talking about Freaknik, and you made a documentary, and people think that's actually what happened. How long have you been looking at the lark of African people? I was watching, and we were talking about it before we went on, the Netflix movie on Shirley Chisholm. And of course, I hope you'll offer some comments on it, some remarks on it. I'm always encouraged by an opportunity for us to regain the momentum of memory. No one should be looking at any film, any fictional, non-fictional, documentary. No one should be looking at any of that as anything other than a point of entry to find out what really happened, because none of them represent what really happened. But they are important because they are moments of cultural meaning making. But the point you're raising is critical. That's where you start. It's not where you end. And you have to gain that momentum of memory, and it takes time.
Yeah.
There's no incentive for one of Kim Mulkey's employees, who now has been freed from the Mulkey plantation by name, image, and likeness, to do anything at Louisiana State University except remain eligible. And I'm sure that Angel Reese, like generations of athletes before her, will have great incentive to remain eligible. And also that those who are at LSU have made quite a nice living making sure those athletes remain eligible, will relieve her of whatever challenges she might face at any particular moment, not because she isn't as gifted academically as she is athletically, but because you simply don't have time. If you're watching March Madness, and it is madness, these bracketed black bodies picking cotton for the NCAA, you have to ask yourself, I always ask myself a question, and I'm sure you ask yourself this too as we're teachers. How much class are y'all missing? Anyway, no, that's irrelevant.
I don't have any expectation that class or going to class or any kind of academia is a part of that. That's a business. That's a multi-billion-dollar business. So Class
Exactly.
is irrelevant, just like I'm saying. And even class today, what is class? You know, most professors, let's talk about grade inflation and the pressures. I never forget, one of the reasons why I stopped teaching at NYU, I remember I gave a student a B, and they brought their parents in, and it was a big deal, and I was brought in and basically told, I said, but they really deserved a C. I was being generous.
I was
I was
being
being
generous.
generous. So y'all now, what are we saying? Everybody gets an A? Like what are we doing here?
Well, you got to keep the brand going.
That was
Keep
25
going, the
years
brand
ago.
going.
So I
Yeah.
imagine it's way worse now. That
Oh
was
no, it's
25
been
years ago.
it's
Yeah.
completely obliterated. I remember one time, the only name I'll mention is my friend and brother Elder Shegun Badageshin, who was the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the time at Howard. If I've had one of these meetings, I've had a million of them where it's graduation time. This is only going to get worse as we approach May. And the student has disappeared, hasn't been around, then gets the failing grade. Then comes, what can I do? Well, let's see. If you've got a time machine, we can go back to January and you can start coming to class. Anyway, so, but this is the thing. Too often, these young people, now desperate, haven't disclosed this to their families. So we're in the dean's conference room. They've called me in like they called you in. What can we do? What can we do? And the elder is there, the grandmother. The child is there, having assured the grandmother that she's graduating. The dean is there and I'm there. I'm always like you. We're going to figure out what we can do. But if you didn't show up at all, I don't have any recourse. But even then, can you do all this work in 2 days? Because this is like 2 days before graduation, right? Can you do enough to get a D? I mean, at this point, I'm not trying to, because your whole family is here. And this is a Black family. Again, who are we to each other? So anyway, I'll end this story with this. We're sitting in the room. Like I said, if I've been in this one time, I've been in 1,000 times, where the parents, the grandparents, the family begins to realize they have been hoodwinked, run amok, led astray, bamboozled. And as the elder realized, as I'm going through what happened, again, this is we just in the room. I'm not trying to screw your grandbaby. We all want her to graduate. Let me tell you, Miss So-and-so, this is what, as she's sitting there. And once she realizes there's no rational basis for graduation, the elder, the grandmother, turns to the dean and just looks him in the eye and said, what you going to do for me? What are you going to do for me? In other words, this is where grades, academia, accreditation goes out the window. This is an elder speaking to, and the dean looking at her, this Yoruba man who knows all these protocols on both sides of the Atlantic. He looks at me because she done stopped talking to me because I'm trying to help. No. Now I understand there's no basis. I'm making a plea and I'm talking to the elder. And then he looked at me, I looked at her, and I said, ma'am, what do you think we should do? Because at this point, we're a community. At this point, the child had stopped talking a long time ago. Long story short, the child graduated because what can we do? And I had to do whatever, and she had to do whatever it took to get drug across that line, which is why around this time, this is the third week of March, that'd be the fourth week of March. Sometime in the early part of April, when I got about 2 weeks left, I start coming in class humming Donny Hathaway. Disconsolate. Come to the mercy seat. Yeah, come on to the mercy seat, because this classroom turns into a mercy seat somewhere around the second or third week of April, and they come to the mercy seat. Welcome. Haven't seen you since January. Why are you here? You've come to the mercy seat. But academia doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It doesn't exist anymore. It's talking head academics. And this is not a diss at all. I was watching that Freaknik documentary. I saw my brother Maurice Hobson and my brother Mark Lamont Hill there talking about freak. And I'm saying, I hope they left out a more nuanced analysis on the cutting room floor. But clearly this celebration of debauchery as Black culture you're missing a great deal. And I know both those brothers very well. So I know y'all talked about that. But I also know when I saw it was produced by Uncle Luke, 21 Savage, and that it had no interest in the story. But it's those kind. Is that people? It's the people who do the grading, like us. We do the grunt work and this kind of thing, trying to give it. And then it is the structure and the institution, and increasingly, these institutions are at a structural crisis, because anything you need to succeed in this capitalist society, which is all about appearances and images and what you can convince other people to think is real, all of that, none of that really relies on the academic university structure.
So first, I watched Regina King, Chef's Kiss, beautiful portrayal. I like the entry point because it's somebody that knew who Shirley Chisholm was and done a little bit of reading on her. I was happy to see, a little lesson on civics. You get to understand Congress a little bit and all of the little machinations behind the scenes with, being a junior congressperson and seniority, which makes no sense. You're like, how you gonna put me on an agriculture? I'm in Brooklyn. We ain't got no cows and farms and stuff. Well, you know your place. And she was like, no, I'm not doing this. And fighting for yourself. I like that, being the only Black woman in Congress and then having the audacity to run for president, all that backstory, because you get to see fundraising and you get to see campaigns and you get to see, beating the streets and how people who you elect should serve you, even if there's some fictional elements to it. I thought during this time it was important to at least, put those breadcrumbs out. But as I was thinking more deeply, because, I'm thinking about publishing and books, and I'm going to a writer's conference. And I actually had a long conversation last night with Ahmad about what does reading look like in 50 years when we haven't codified or awakened the appetite for just read. I mean, there are a lot of people here. We do readings in office hours. I would go out on a limb and say maybe a lot of people aren't reading all of the books, and I'm gonna raise my hand too because I don't really have time.
The vast majority aren't.
Yeah, so we're having a conversation, and you're doing a masterful job actually going through the pages. So I'm like, thank you for reading for me.
Well, we have to.
Yeah, no, I know, but
been there a long time. We know how it works.
But if people aren't reading themselves, like, what does it look like? So now it looks like what it is now, which are vanity publishing pieces where celebrities are, making the rounds and people buy the books to put them on their bookshelves, but may or may not crack them open, or maybe the books are like, nursery rhymes. And so you can get through them really easily because there's not a whole lot of depth in it. And there's no purpose for it other than to, as a vanity piece to give celebrities more places to go to speak to more people.
Absolutely.
So I was lamenting last night because I was like, is this even something I should be doing? I had to have that conversation with myself. What's the point?
You still thinking about it?
Yeah, I am. And today may, also, as I'm in community with folk, you get nostalgic, but I'm very pragmatic. I don't pride myself in it, but I don't dream a lot. I'm not a whimsical, fanciful person. I'm very, if it ain't, it's not, if I can't touch it and feel it, I don't know about it, and I'm not to say I don't have an imagination, because I think I have a vast one, but
I'm about to say, go ahead.
I dream about a future because I also believe in the things that I dream that I can help make it happen. But I don't know what the future looks like in terms of, I feel like we are proud in our ignorance. We have something to say. At the end of the day ends, and they're out there with the president. I'm like, and people are saying, that's profound. At the end of the day ends. I was like, you're sitting with the president of the United States and the vice.
Yeah.
And we celebrate that because it's
the ignorance is
so real. Ooh, wow. What does that say about us?
Yeah, I decided I wanted to, I felt a little felt like stirring up a real conversation. So I went in class Thursday after the news dropped about our sister Knowles Carter and her provocative album cover. And it was the hip hop class. So I came in, I said, so what y'all think about y'all American Queen? She was Oshun, then she was Black Panthers. She was in the HBCU college marching band. And now she's a cowboy. What y'all think? And it's like, oh, some of y'all in the hive, y'all not African bees, so I won't feel those things. Please, let's have a conversation. And so we started talking about it. And the only reason I bring it up is because, I said to them, listen, That's a power couple. And I understand Beyonce, who is has the bigger footprint in many ways than her husband, but together, it takes a lot of understanding of where we are in time and space to have brothers in orange jumpsuits dancing at halftime in the Super Bowl, or people mad because you've created a Beyonce song and put a few fiddles in it and call it country music. And I said, but at the end of the day, what do we know? We know that bag has been secured. And if you don't understand anything else, when the sister said it's not country music, it's not country song, it's a Beyonce song. And when Dolly Parton jumped in, I said, oh, this is all about business. I said, but that's not even where I want to go with this. And we talked about that later. We can talk about some of that today. I said, the thing that I think all of cultural meaning making, which is why in our African studies framework, we separate cultural meaning making from movement and memory. Movement and memory talks about how this thing moves over time and space, what endures over time and space, which is why, by the way, I think all of these documentaries and all these films are really social structure battles over memory. That's what they're about. They're in an attempt to curate what's going on today, not to accurately describe what took place in the past. But in terms of cultural meaning making, I said, that category was developed to give us not just a barometer of what cultural texts and practices are created in a particular moment, a film, a song, an album, anything, a dance. It is to use that as a point of entry to understand what's going on in the society at that time. I said, what you're seeing right now is, to me, it indicates very seriously that what we are dealing with now is an entire race of children. And then again, man, I said, what do you mean? I said, because only children would be so passionate about something they don't know nothing about. This is all the responses are visceral. All the responses, and it doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter your age. So, I mean, and then we had the conversation about Beyonce, of course, and we got a chance to talk a little bit about some of the things we've talked about in great length. For everybody from DeFord Bailey and the Black Stars who were involved in country music back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, to the origin, Laurent Dubois' book, The Banjo. I'm looking over there on that far bookshelf, and the African origins of so much that becomes what's so-called country music. The Africans who apprenticed people like Mabel Carter and the Carter family, Johnny Cash, little Jimmy Dickens, all those Africans who showed them how to play the instruments, who gave them the songs. I said, and so, and also even the Beyonce imagery. I mean, we know the history of the Black Rodeo. Ron Martin had on Two Sisters from the Bill Pickett Rodeo the other day, and that conversation we've all had, at least here, about these roots. So this isn't what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is none of this momentum of memory is in the conversation. That's why I thought today it might be interesting in terms of.
I had somebody come into the YouTube chat talking about the guitar is an Italian word. And I was like, oh, okay.
They said the guitar is an Italian word. Well, let's think about it. The is an article. That's a word from European languages. Guitar, we'll concede that. Italian is, that verb comes from is, are. You can conjugate that back to Latin. So that too qualifies as a European word. Okay, that another article would be European. In other words, you're using European languages. What's your point, sir?
Right. It's not African. I'm like, how do you argue with somebody
to say that? Neither is African as a word. What's your point?
Right? How do we argue with people who have no? I'm just throwing my hands up. I'm like,
no, you don't argue. Just realize,
everybody's just so ignorant. I just can't. And y'all, and I said, you doing this in public? I'm like, you know, we can all see this comment.
Ignorance is the thing. Wow. I mean, again, what is it? What did James Baldwin say? Love helps you recognize what you don't remember. So in those moments, it's like, we're just going to embrace you. Let us agree to agree, as Marie Kelsey would say. And rather than create the kind of friction that our open enemies seize on to advance their goals, hence all these battles on social media, immediately people taking opposing sides. It's like, no, what you doing? Just going to keep pouring this clean glass of water. Don't be mad. Drink this. Just drink this. Keep it going. By the way, when you said, of course, your imagination is outsized. And I hear what you're saying about not dreaming. And I understand, even as I was watching the Freaknik documentary, and this Wakanda reference to me tickles me to no end. Wakanda's not real. Well, actually, no, it's on the map. I think it's near Zamunda. I think they're in the general same conception map. But at any rate, Wakanda's not real. And but that doesn't negate the power of Afrofuturism, as we know. Our brother Kevin Strait, we were all with at BlurredCon last year. But I was reading this new book by Ruha Benjamin, Professor Benjamin, entitled Imagination, a Manifesto. I'm not telling you how to go get this. I'm just saying I got it and I read it. And I'm looking for the connections because she talks about the importance of imagination as a site of struggle and a place for possibility and reshaping the future. I absolutely agree. Here's the challenge we have. Where are you basing the origin of your imagination? If you're just standing flat foot in the now, having received from the social structure we all live in, cues, narratives, texts, grounding moments, then your imagination has been shaped by what has been poured into you. I think about that even as you head over to Medgar Evers for the 17th National Black Writers Conference. And the number 17 is important because we keep track of those kind of things. But it's also unimportant in the sense that what our friend Brenda Green has done and all those women and men that surround her there at Medgar Evers and beyond at the Center for Black Writing, what she's done is continue in terms of taking a baton from generations who had these Black Writers Conferences stretching back through most of the 20th century and reaching key moments in moments like the Fisk Writers Conferences in the 1960s, the Writers Conferences that convened at Howard University in the 1970s. And then, you know, what Brenda Green has been able to do is continue that momentum. And so these convenings are important, but I thought about it because, of course, this year's theme, the theme of all that we carry, all that we carry, where do we go from here? I think it's important because when we think about all that we carry, and that's actually a riff on a book by Tia Miles, All That We Carried, a book that she wrote about a cultural text, a sack that which is called Ashley's Sack from the 19th century, coming out of enslavement. She wrote a book called All That She Carried, The Journeys of Ashley's Sack, a Black family keepsake, to talk about this material, this piece of material, like fabric, but a sack, a literal sack, and how this represents the history of this family and kind of as a stand-in for a journey of African people during and after enslavement through the contemporary era. But that's where, and she'll be there to talk about her work in the context. But I love the theme, all that we carry, because it provokes us. What is all that we carry? Again, thinking about Africana studies. When we start our history with slavery, as John Clark would say, everything since then looks like progress. We don't even understand the captivity. I'm glad you opened with Lawrence Fishburne there, because in that letter, what that formerly captive man, I'm trying to even move away from enslavement, because enslavement carries such a stigmatizing, reductionist concept, because these were not slaves. These were human beings who were captured. Because in that letter, what you see is a human being who never lost sight of value, his own, the family he was in, and it was always clear about being oppressed, being captive, who was being diplomatic in language, but never think for a minute that anyone who was captive wasn't clear that they were in captivity and did not desire to be free and did not desire to free themselves. Circumstances dictated the ways that they resisted, but never assume that any human being does not resist, even if it is a resistance of the spirit. So that's why at the crux of the reparation issue is the question of self-repair. Only a community can repair itself. Relationships have to be repaired by those who are experiencing those relationships. The demand for material compensation, the demand for equity in law, the demand for economic floors being put under people, all of that are external demands. But the work of internal repair is a governance question, and it is driven by ways of knowing. So when that brother is writing that letter, he is assuming, or at least kind of stipulating, saying that I'm just going to make the assumption that the person reading this letter, the former enslaver, has a way of knowing that can understand where I'm coming from. In other words, you owe me, unless, of course, you have a way of knowing which says that power is the only thing that I care about, which means I don't owe you. Why? Because you can't make me pay you. That's where the reparation thing, that's where the governance and social structure bump up against each other. We talk about that another time. But I'm glad we started with Fishburne, because all that brother and his family carry is drawn from their experiences during enslavement, and whatever ways of knowing came from Africa and continued to echo down through the years. This is why, again, Daniel Black wrote his book, The Coming, because we were not completely erased as human beings. It was, in fact, our ways of knowing that allowed us to fortify ourselves to resist collectively in the governance formations, the maroonage, the fights big and small that we waged for centuries, until the ultimate fights where we freed ourselves throughout the Western Hemisphere, whether it be the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, whether it be the work in Latin America and Central America, whether it be the Caribbean, the Blue Mountains of the Caribbean, Nanny of the Maroons, all the things we've talked about, whether it be the Great Civil War, the Great Dismal Swamp in Carolina, Virginia, or Louisiana, the swamps of Louisiana, or the Seminoles, the so-called Cimarrones, or the Seminoles, the Africans and indigenous people of Florida who were forced across to Oklahoma, and even though there are governance tensions inside those formations, still resist. All of those things are drawn from ways of knowing that we brought with us and commingled with our experiences to create, as Ngugi wa Thiong'o would say, something torn and new. That's what I was looking for in Professor Benjamin's book, Imagination and Manifesto. And it's not completely absent, but the difficult thing is to tie the momentum of our memory from our deepest memories, what Jacob Carruthers would call the deep well of Africana knowledge, of African knowledge, to tie our memories for as far back as we can get them. And that takes time. That takes time. But we celebrate the fact that we have this space to contribute to the spaces over time. This is not the first space like this. To contribute to that momentum of memory, to contribute to recovering that momentum of memory. And we are not going to stop. We persist because what is at stake is literally everything. Today would have been, and is, but would have been materially, if had he continued to walk on top of the earth and not been assassinated in Guyana, today would have been the 82nd birthday of Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney, of course, the great, and we've talked about Walter Rodney at length. I encourage people to go into the Knarrative archive and to investigate for yourselves in class. Again, the resources that are being poured into Knarrative as a result of everyone in Knarrative, everywhere here on the Nubia side, these contributions, these financial contributions that are now beginning to continuing to, and then taking it to the next level of building capacity, allow you now to search and to find these conversations. And we can talk about Walter Rodney because we've talked about him at length, and you can go back. Again, we won't repeat that at this juncture, even though repetition, as I said last week, is important. Thinking about Walter Rodney over the last couple of days, realizing we would have this conversation today, drove me back to Walter Rodney on education. Now, Rodney, of course, from Guyana. Walter Rodney, who lived in the UK, who lived and taught, he and his wife, Patricia, living and teaching in Africa, East Africa in particular, Tanzania, then coming back to Guyana after spending some time in Jamaica, all the while being plagued by social structure machinations trying to blunt his work, and in the governance formations, people who look like him, who are beholden to those structures, trying to blunt his work. But ultimately, of course, after he's assassinated, and with the collusion of the local government in Guyana, and among others, the United States of America government, very much aware of what was going on, facilitating what was going on, Rodney continues to live in our imaginations. And so one of the things that I didn't take to storage, I kind of keep around, is a special issue, a collection of pieces edited by the Institute of the Black World in 1974, called Education and Black Struggle. I can see that there. Let me see if I can make sure I don't got the glare there. Yeah. Education and Black Struggle, Notes from the Colonized World. This is the Institute of the Black World. Among the contributors, Vincent Harding, C.L.R. James, St. Clair Drake, Grace Lee Boggs, Walter Rodney, Julius Nyerere, Black prisoners, very important, Robert Hill, Richard Small, Bill Strickland. Of the people here, Bill Strickland and Bobby Hill are still walking on top of the earth. But Walter Rodney had a piece in here, Education in Africa and Contemporary Tanzania. And the one of the things I love about Walter Rodney, I'm using this as an example of where we're going today, which is where we go every time we're together, which is the grounding of the momentum of our memory by beginning in the right place. Rodney begins his conversation, which actually was a lecture he gave in 1972, April 1972, at UMass, University of Massachusetts. He said, this is the first thing he says, in discussing education in Africa, we should first contrast the independent educational system as it existed before the arrival of the Europeans with the colonial education system established after 1885, which is the conventional date for the beginning of African colonization. The differences between the two are critical to any real evaluation of contemporary education in Africa. Shouldn't be controversial. That is where we should start every conversation. You want to talk about Black imagination? You got to start with pre-invasion and then bring forth the momentum of memory. If you don't start with pre-invasion, if you don't start pre-disruption, what you're going to get is an imagination that is still crafted toward your experiences rather than the collective experiences that bespeak our relationships over time and space. Even your dreams will be crafted by the social structures that you encounter. And so the trauma becoming the point of departure gives you dreams that are really congealed around just being human in the world. That is a very human impulse. It absolutely is. But discarding the momentum of memory becomes a problem. This is a theme that we have to come back to over and over and over and over again. So, in this moment, I thought about it because in the context of what we have been talking about of late, and this is the second part of today's Black Writers Conference at Medgar Evers, all that we carry. First thing we have to establish is, who is we? We got to build this we as we go. What is all that we carry? Because, we make selections, narratives. We don't carry everything from previous experiences, but the fact that we don't carry anything from previous experiences consciously becomes the determinative factor of how we even work today and dream, because we rob ourselves of the momentum of memory, which means we rob ourselves of the lessons we have to learn to go forward. The second part of the theme today at the Black Writers Conference, of course, is where do we go from here, which is a well discussed, and we will continue to discuss theme because we have to do that. Of course, we did it through Martin Luther King. And where do we go from here? Chaos or community? But when we talk about combining those two things, all that we carry and where do we go from here? All that we carry helps us determine where we go from here. It helps us determine who the we is. It helps us determine where here is. And we are at another intersection moment. I was watching some conversations you were having over the week, around the question of Palestine. And we saw that yesterday, Russia and China blocked the U.S. resolution introduced at the UN Security Council for temporary ceasefire in Gaza, because if you listen to the remarks from the Russian and the Chinese ambassador or representatives in the Security Council, they say what you're basically doing is relieving Israel of any even hesitation to continue to wipe out the Palestinians. So no, we're not voting for this. And yes, we're vetoing it. And the only reason, I think it was the Russian or the Chinese, I'm trying to remember. The only reason you're introducing this is because you're worried about the election cycle in the United States of America. And of course, that is the case. But the reason you're worried about the election cycle in the United States of America is because people in the United States of America joining people of the world, all that we carry, who is the we going from here? Where is here? Here's the contemporary world. Here is the settler colonialism of Israel. And here is the weed that is developing out of no. We say no more murder. And so now you got the Biden administration telling Linda Thompson Greenfield and them, you got to go to the UN, and now you got to introduce a resolution. This is after the U.S. has blocked several resolutions coming out of the Security Council. Why? Oh, all of a sudden you're going to jump on this side? Why, you want to swoop down and be the savior? No, not yet, not yet. Not good enough, not good enough. Keep the pressure up, everyone, because the United States is going to have to pick something that they wouldn't have picked. And if people think, for example, that there's no difference between Republicans and Democrats, what did we talk about months ago? Right here together. This little snot-nosed affirmative action baby, Jared Kushner, said the quiet part out loud in the intervening week between last week and this week, saying that, that Gaza's, some excellent beachfront property. He already over there developing, and we already talked about that. So the world is shocked. The only reason y'all shocked is because you started your memory with this morning by scrolling through TikTok. You don't have the momentum of memory. Understand what's at stake in this moment. So it's a good time for us to talk a little bit about that. And so I thought what we do in terms of this, where do we go from here in the context of all that we carry? And, I didn't finish the Shirley Chisholm film. I watched the beginning, I watched the end, and then I went back to the beginning and kept going. Because, at the end, they try to tie everything together and tell you what happened to people. Boom, boom, boom. So having some momentum of memory and having not put everything in storage, I did pull a few things that I thought might be interesting. I pulled a couple of things on Shirley Chisholm's political philosophy. And of course, you can read Shirley Chisholm's work for herself. Unbought and Unbossed, The Good Fight. These are a couple of her autobiographies that she wrote. This is a piece from the Black Scholar. I kind of keep my Black Scholars around. This journal, along with these journals, Black World, Negro Digest, and I pulled a few that talk about the period when Shirley Chisholm was most was in the political eye of the United States and the world, in a way that she hadn't been before and wasn't since, until she made transition, I think 2005, at age 80 years old. These journals document the conversations that were going on among African people. And of course, these documentaries are not documentaries. These films are not historical things. They're points of entry. They're not historical texts. They are cultural meaning-making moments, texts and practices which mark the moment we're living in now and are a barometer of where we are now, the here we are in now. Why are you making this movie about Shirley Chisholm? And thank you. Somebody in Nubia, I looked here on the phone, somebody in Nubia noted that Zinga Frazier was a consultant on the film. Our sister Zinga Frazier, Zinga, good sister, known Zinga since the days that she was at Temple. So I'm sure if Nate Norman is watching this pop, Zinga worked on that film. And from what I've seen in about third of the film I've watched total, there are some, filmmakers are very good at this, tugging at the heartstrings, giving you just enough to want to know more. But then the question becomes, how do you know more? Because as you say, with these ball players who are now, out there making money for these universities and now for themselves with name, image, and likeness, which is one reason why Nick Saban had to run, because he's used to being the undisputed lord and master of his plantation down there in Alabama, like he was at Louisiana State. But now, what you mean these enslaved Negroes can go out and make their own money? I gotta quit. Yeah, get out. Anyway, the point is that, these athletes and anybody else might say they know now because they watched the movie. What's the incentive for them to go further? The incentive for them to go further is that makes the difference between whether you're going to be liberated and free and build a different kind of society, or whether you're going to repeat the same kind of mistakes, because these people in the social structure that we live in who have different interests than you are working overtime to narrate these stories. And anytime you see the appearance of a Shirley Chisholm movie or a Freaknik documentary, or all this stuff now, all this fascination, look past the black talking heads. Look past the archival footage. Look past the stunning performances and ask yourself why. And do these things represent all that we carry? Because when we ask ourselves, where do we go from here? If we're going to use those as these things as the frameworks for how we struggle, we are going to lose, friends. We're going to lose, family, because we are not grappling with the things that were grappled with at the time that these people who are being represented to us, as Clyde Taylor might say, the politics of representation in the contemporary moment. So I thought I would go back and kind of look a little bit at our sister, Shirley Chisholm, whose folks came from Barbados, that Brooklyn sister who was a first-rate educator working with little children, not even elementary school, daycare children. And by the time she was 35, she was running all these daycares there in Brooklyn and in greater New York. And then, of course, who runs for and ends up in the New York State Assembly. And then from there runs for and accomplishes the feat of becoming the first Black woman in Congress. And as you say, Prof, when they open up, you see the dots representing the 435 in the federal legislature, the House of Representatives. And then they move down to the number that were Black, and then none of them was a woman. And then here comes Shirley Chisholm. So immediately you see the narrative framework is going to be about this question of, and I think about the books that are on Shirley Chisholm that are not her autobiography, the books and the films that have been done. Shola Lynch's Shirley Chisholm Unbought and Unbossed was one that was done a few years ago. Of course, the book that just came out in the last couple of years on Shirley Chisholm by Anastasia Curwood. Anastasia Curwood's mother worked with and for Shirley Chisholm. And of course, Zinga Frazier directs the Shirley Chisholm Project there in New York. I mean, brilliant sisters, brilliant scholars doing this work. And then you make a movie and people go to the movie and don't go past the movie to the real connection, and you might miss the whole thing. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes this morning on this question, Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm, this is from the October 1975 issue of the Black Scholar, volume 7, number 2. Black politics. What course in 1976? Where do we go from here? By 1976, they are 4 years past Gary. 4 years past Gary in the Gary Convention. And there are a lot of documents from the Gary Convention. That's why they had the National Black Political Convention. Richard Hatcher and Carl Stokes, the mayors of Cleveland and Gary, Indiana, the first 2 Black elected officials of as mayors of major American cities in the United States of America, coming after the Voting Rights Act and the political momentum people had gained. If we study what happened in Gary 4 years before where I'm going to go with Shirley Chisholm in a moment, we will understand the more things change, the more they remain the same. And we rob ourselves of the momentum of memory when we lean too much on narratives that elevate individuals and individual stories over the politics, the governance debates and consensus building that took place in their quote unquote life and times. That's why they say the life and times of people, right? This is, and I didn't, rather than go through and look for primary documents, I kind of took a shortcut this morning and pulled this off the shelf. This is Leonard Moore's book, The Defeat of Black Power, Civil Rights and the National Black Political Convention of 1972. Preceding 1972, and by the way, that's Amiri Baraka, of course, whose son Ras is the mayor of Newark. This is him at the podium at the 1972 convention. If you want to see a documentary, that's a pretty good point of entry too. In fact, Why As We Americans, which has Ras Baraka as a point of entry, Udi Aloni and Ayanna Morris's documentary. I mean, we talked about that last year around September when they screened it here in Washington, D.C. and was in conversation with Mayor Baraka about his family. And of course, you know, all love and admiration and respect continuing with his mother who still walks the earth, Mama Mina, and of course, Amiri Baraka, the whole Baraka family. And so that's a good one to put what happened in Gary 1972, the National Black Political Convention, in a longer arc of struggle that precedes it and then came through that era and then continues to this day. Again, the momentum of memory. And another one is called Nation Time. Nation Time is an excellent documentary with a lot of archival footage from the 1972 convention. But I want to start in terms of Shirley Chisholm with 1971. Because in 1971, there was a Black Expo in Chicago that was pulled together by Jesse Lewis Jackson, of course, Reverend Jesse Jackson. At that time, it was an attempt to get Black business owners connected with Black consumers and to get other companies as well, non-Black companies, connected with Black consumers in an attempt to leverage the Black dollar to use it to force these companies to hire Black people, to share some equity, ultimately, perhaps with Black people, understanding that in a capitalist society, it is these huge companies that run the place. I don't know if you all saw here today's Financial Times weekend. Trump unlocks $3 billion SPAC windfall. Donald Trump's social media business will become publicly listed after shareholders of a blank check company, that shell company they created, approved the deal, unlocking a potential $3 billion plus windfall for the former U.S. president as he seeks to cover massive legal liabilities. Trump Media and Technology Group, the company behind his Truth Social, will list next week on the NASDAQ exchange. So people thinking, look, Tish James trying to get your stuff, but guess what? He had this always in his back pocket, because they were talking 2 years ago about going public. If the deal finally went down, people saying, well, he can't get that money immediately. No, but what he can do is go to a lender with a different set of circumstances now, and go to investors who can purchase the option for stocks in here, and maybe he gets that. He done told people now, what yesterday he said he got $500 million, whatever. You ain't got to listen to nothing Trump says. But I'm saying, while we're missing the point, other things are taking place. And in 1970,
wait, I'm sorry. It's been my dream, so I do dream a little bit, that some very wealthy person would buy a bulk of the stock and then change the trajectory of the company, because you can do that. You know, these corporate takeovers, because the stock will plummet like at some point.
yeah.
And maybe collectively, a lot of people could get together with a plan and buy up all of the stock, and then say, hey, sit down. We're gonna turn it into Nubia, maybe. I don't know.
Well, let's think about that. Actually, that's interesting, because we know that certainly is a possibility. We also know that before anything makes it like that to the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange or any stock exchange, the lawyers have, they got preferred stock. Now you can send me back. Well, you know better than I do. I mean, send me back to commercial paper. It's been 30 years ago since I sat in that class but with Doug Whaley. But the whole idea, there's stock you can buy and there's stock you can never buy.
Right. But I'm saying not now, because there's going to come a point. And again, this is 10 years down, 5 years down. It's not right now. You'll do that right now, to your point, because they're setting it up right now for that money right now.
Yes.
We're not putting money in their pocket. You don't do that right now.
Don't do it right now. Tell them.
But it's vision, though. If you have vision, then you're like, okay, there's going to come a point where this thing's going to crash and burn, because ain't nobody really on Truth Social. Just the way, Elon Musk's ass bought something for $44 billion, and it's now probably worth not the paper that it's written on. But he didn't have to put up his own money too, which is another, this shell game that they're playing. We got to learn it, and then we have to master it, and then we have to sit with that knowledge and then devise a plan for how we interact. Like, me just saying that. So a lot of people probably, let me buy up the stock. No. This is down the line, but we have to be thinking like that. Oh, okay, that's cute.
That's right.
All right, we're gonna wait. We're gonna build a war chest over here, and then we're coming for it. We're gonna come forward and dismantle it.
That's exactly right. Which is why we have to think beyond these nation-state lines. That's a solidarity politics. That's exactly right. Don't cut yourself off. Thank you, Prof, because that's absolutely right. Oh, and thank you, in Nubia, K. Mahoman says, Why We Americans and Nation Time can be watched on Prime. That's good to know. Also, somebody mentioned further on about the Black businesses that helped sponsor the Black Expo of 1971. And I'm saying this in the context of the Shirley Chisholm film, because let's just go back to the early 70s at this moment. Of course, with the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the rise from the political dead of Richard Milhouse Nixon, the election of 1978, the anti-war movement, all of that work that animated it, the rise of the white nationalists, the open white nationalists, who had really put their stake down in electoral politics at the presidential level with the white nationalists from the West, Barry Goldwater. And by 4 years later, of course, Lyndon Johnson coming out saying he's not running for re-election, the politics around Vietnam and all that, a clear choice between human beings and white nationalists, which really continues that momentum, which has built through into today with Donald Trump and the current white nationalist party. 1968, Nixon becomes their champion. And of course, the silent majority, as Kevin Phillips and so many others have written about. Nixon Land, Rick Perlman's book, talk about this question of, among many other things. I won't get too deep into that. But the point is this: Nixon is running for re-election in 1972. Part of the expo in 1971 was an attempt by Jesse Jackson, not only, and those around him, and the people in Chicago generally and beyond, to create momentum, not just around economic power, but political power. So there were a number of forums that were held at Expo 1971. It's called Harambe. Let us pull together. Remember, in 1971, Kwanzaa is 5 years old. Harambe. Pulled together in Kiswahili. Harambe Black Expo was held September 25th to October the 3rd and featured a quote-unquote who's who of Black America. There were exhibits, entertainment, workshops, seminars, shows, conferences. First 2 days consisted of the National Labor Leaders Conference. Again, all that we carried. Where do we go from here? Every time I see something emerge where Black people today, with a couple of money, some corporate donors, or maybe their own efforts, say, this is the first. When I hear those 4 words, I almost immediately say, let me just listen to the rest. This is the first, keep going. The first convening of, okay. The other one is always trigger suspicion. This is the largest. Okay, here we go. This is the largest convening. But it's okay. It's not okay at all, but it's okay in a moment because I know that that's coming from a place of wanting to help us. We want to help ourselves. But when we rob ourselves of the momentum of memory, we rob ourselves of the lessons that our ancestors have created for us to learn from and make progress. So the first 2 days were National Labor Leaders, while the second 2 days were titled African Afro-American Conference, which was not open to the public. Meaning what? Solidarity politics beyond the United States. Now, who was at that conference? We're going to talk about that in a minute. The official opening night of Black Expo featured entertainment by Aretha Franklin, Ozzie Davis, Ruby Dee, Stevie Wonder, the Jackson 5, Donny Hathaway, Bill Cosby, Four Tops, Billy Eckstine, Albertina Walker, and the Caravans. The expo got down to business when Carl Stokes, the mayor of Cleveland, delivered a talk titled The Politics of 1972. Pause. Fast forward. The politics of 2024. Everything we're talking about today, they were talking about then. The momentum of memory. Today, it's Sudan, it's Haiti, it's Congo, it's Palestine. Then it was Vietnam, Indochina. The war, stopping the war. The war must stop. Dory Ladner, recently, as we talked about it last week, making transition. Dory Ladner talking about being in the anti-war effort. This conversation, what may have helped get Martin Luther King killed in 1968, coming out against the war. But Nixon is riding now high, and he says, I got a secret plan to end the war. That's how he gets part of his getting back into office. But he's riding that white nationalist ticket. What does Carl Stokes, the mayor of Cleveland, one of 2 mayors of major American cities who are of African descent at this point, the other being Richard Hatcher, who's going to host the Gary Conference in 1972, he says Stokes opened his speech by making it clear that he was not speaking for any organization, either closely or loosely, official or unofficial group or organization, not of the Black elected officials, not by the Congressional Black Caucus, which had just formed a couple of years before, not by the Panthers, nor the Baptists. This was an attempt to kind of displace himself as any spokesperson. But here's what was going on at the time. This is going to tie to Shirley Chisholm. Black people, the Black elected officials, Black nationalists, Pan-Africanists, Black people generally in the community were thinking, should somebody Black run for president of the United States? Black people had run for president of the United States before. But 1972, at this crisis moment, the idea was that Nixon was going to be reelected, and he was reelected in a landslide. It was the Hoopers that killed Richard Nixon, the break-ins and all that. He was riding high. Some people in here remember that. So running for office wasn't the idea that you're going to win, but running for office was a tactic or a strategy. One of the thrusts that was being discussed then was, can we create an independent Black political party? Ron Daniels is still around, still walking the earth. You ask Ron Daniels about that. Many people who were there. If you all were there, if you're in Nubia, please, jump in and let us know about that. In fact, we can talk about that some on office hours on Monday night, because we're going to devote all 2 hours of office hours to conversation. We're going to come in, Baba Oz and I are going to open it up and continue conversation we were doing last Monday night. So we want to talk about these things. So yes, his brother Lewis was one of the starters of the BCC, Brother Greg. Thank you. This is important. This is why collective knowledge is important for younger people, for people who aren't from a certain place. When we come together, we literally crowdsource the knowledge. This is the value of Nubia. This is the value of our continued conversation. And on the YouTube side, this is the value of being in the chat and being in the comments, because people flesh that out. People flesh it out and contribute their own knowledge. And that's how we displace the idea of academics telling us about things, because believe me, that is not the way we need to go. We have jailbroken the Black university. It is that is the we are building that are doing this. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor this point, but Stokes is making this speech where he's saying, yeah, I don't think we should have one candidate for president. He is saying that we need to work within the existing two-party system. Sound familiar? But he's saying that if we're going to have Black political power, we need to organize within that system. And he offers himself and what they did in Cleveland as a prime example, precinct by precinct, door by door, street by street, knocking, discussing, registering people to vote, funding ourselves, getting on those telephones. So it isn't about carpet bombing people with TV ads, although today it might be, because people need to do that shoe leather work. And you see that now billions have been pledged to get Biden reelected. We don't know where the white horses are going to ride out of the night. Not the white horses like the one Beyonce is on the album cover, but the white horses, meaning the billionaires who are going to back the white nationalists. We don't know where the money's going to come from yet, although we can get a clue with them unlocking this $3 billion IPO that's going to come out next week, that clearly forces are being aligned to have a money battle. But what Stokes was telling them in 1971 in Chicago was, these political wars are won by organization, and that organization is about putting together the political structure and an agenda, and then going door to door to be in conversation with our people. He said, that's how I got elected to mayor of Cleveland, and it wasn't just Black people. We got to build this multiracial coalition. Now, why do I bring this up? The Shirley Chisholm movie is out now. People will watch that like they know what was going on. You got to understand the larger context. Now, yes, the anti-war movement is gestured toward, no question. Yes, the Panthers are introduced in that. Yes, you see the Black politicians introduced as well, the Percy Suttons and the political mentors of Shirley Chisholm and her comrades and colleagues. Absolutely. But what we can never rely on is a movie to help us understand and regain the momentum of memory, because a movie will give us a glimpse of some of what we carry. But we need all that we carry, and we can recover all that we carry through the slow accretive work of study. Let's continue. He says, and this is what Leonard Moore writes. He says, despite the success African Americans had experienced politically with the passage of the Voting Rights Act, Stokes did not want those in attendance to underestimate the difficult job that lay ahead in trying to exercise Black political power at the national level. So he lays out a 5-point strategy for the 1972 election. Number one, that Black elected officials and Black voters make no commitment to any of the announced and easily draftable candidates for president. This 1971, pre-announcement, Shirley Chisholm. Because remember, Shirley Chisholm, she's giving these speeches. She's real popular on college campuses. And these women approach her, you women, she tells these women, look, if y'all raise this money, you raise 5 stacks, maybe then they raise double that and more. He said, oh, well, hell, I'll jump in. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Number 2 of 5, Stokes says that Black voters concern themselves with issues, not personalities. Number 3, that Black voters in their respective states start now in the process of deciding upon delegates to next year's political party conventions, the 2 parties. Number 4, that communication be developed with other political minority groups as the issues are formed and common interests identified for coalition purposes. Ain't nothing new under the sun, y'all. Number 5, that Black delegates go to the conventions with a full understanding of why they are there. He says we got to deal with the why. Let me fast forward. Because that's 1971. Shirley Chisholm is concerned by 1972 after she announces that, well, let me just do this. He writes then later on in 1971, the last major strategy session of 1971 occurred in November at the Conference of Black Elected Officials held in Washington, D.C. at the Sheridan Park Hotel, November 18th through 20th. Congressman Louis Stokes, that's Carl Stokes' brother, as you said in the chat, laid out the purpose of the event. We see this conference as a means of Black elected officials coming together for the purpose of effectively linking together a united program of legislative and political action for the benefit of their constituents. Goes on. Sounds good, but really, they trying to figure out, the Congressional Black Caucus leading this, how they're going to be at the center of whatever collective decision-making is made in Black America prior to the 72 elections. The 72 elections is driving all of this. And so they have 14 sets of workshops. And at the same time they're doing that, the Congress of African Peoples, this is Baraka and them, this is the Black nationalist, the Pan-Africanist. You can read Baraka's accounts of this. My man Mike Samanga has an excellent book on this. The Congress of African Peoples is meeting, doing something very similar. A number of groups are doing something very similar. Pan-African groups, nationalist groups, political groups, all types of groups, churches. What's going on for 1972? They're trying to plan it. The CBC didn't intend on calling for a big convention of Black people by this time. Black Expo has taken place. Now they're in DC for a Black meeting of Black politicians. The Black politicians trying to decide how we're going to be in a part of leadership, how we're going to assume some form of responsibility. They're in the echo and the shadow of the Voting Rights Act. The idea if you're a Black politician, you owe something to the Black community is front and center. You can't have people out here like we have today. I happen to be Black. Okay, them happen to be Black Negroes. Thank you for your service to whoever you're serving, but you're not serving us. We have to remember this, because when we ask where do we go from here, we're talking about us first in coalition and in comradeship, but we talking about us because we are talking about a governance conversation that has to precede any interface with social structures. Otherwise, you're just out here getting shot at, out here being used. All right. Here's the question. Shirley Chisholm, by this time, has jumped on these men. Why? She has been excluded from speaking, headlining, being at these spaces. So clearly there's some sexism at work. And then there are other factors at work. This is what Leonard Moore writes. During a session led by Congressman Clay, it's Bill Clay out of Missouri, on the development of Black political power in the 70s, he opened by stressing the need for Black political unity. Quote, Blacks are the only people in the United States who place others' interests before their own. We must play by the rules of the game, which also say that you can take whatever you can from whomever you can and however you can, end quote. On the panel with Clay was Coretta Scott King, Gary Mayer, Richard Hatcher, Congressman Diggs, Percy Sutton. Remember, Percy Sutton is a big advocate for Shirley Chisholm. In a minute, in Gary in 1972, we're going to see him propose that the convention, the Black Political Convention, endorsed Shirley Chisholm for president and Amiri Baraka. But they didn't get much further without controversy. Clay tells it best. Here's what Bill Clay writes, quote, at that point, Florida State Representative Gwendolyn Cherry, a supporter of Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm's presidential aspirations, stood up and accused male members of the Congressional Black Caucus of attempting to undermine the Chisholm campaign, and all hell broke loose. Cherry declared that I, as moderator of the workshop, ought to relinquish the microphone, in her words, to our illustrious presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket, Shirley Chisholm, end quote. Embarrassed, Clay gave her the microphone, and months of frustration from Chisholm came out in a 10-minute attack on Black males and the Congressional Black Caucus for their unwillingness to support her. When she got the microphone, she mentioned that some of the Black males in attendance had insecure egos that prevented them from supporting her candidacy. She could not understand why they were, quote, always plotting and planning, end quote, against her. And throughout her lifetime, she had dealt with discrimination both as a woman and as a Black person. Quote, there is a hang-up about this maleness and femaleness, end quote, she said. She felt slighted. Here's the final quote. I am the highest elected official woman. Oh, I am the highest elected woman official today. And for those who don't know, the Democratic National Committee woman from the state of New York, end quote. She then looked at the Stokes brothers, Carr and Lewis, and said, quote, you better wake up. Now that's great movie. That's great movie fare. That's not all the story. All that we carried. Fast forward to the, oh, I'm sorry. We should do this very quickly. The headline of the New York Times read, quote, Mrs. Chisholm chides Black Caucus. Now here's where it happens. We're having a governance conversation an important, legitimate, necessary conversation, working out these governance questions. Here come the social structure. Mrs. Chisholm chides Black Caucus. Hey, you shut your lips because you don't have the interest for us. It's like this question of gender solidarity. Black men, white men, black women, white women. Don't do that. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. Let me not say that. Let me not be so declarative about that. We should have a conversation and people bring their evidence to show where there is such a thing, because the rebuttable presumption is that there's not such a thing. I see no history to tell you about some solidarity politics in any way that wasn't broken up by race eventually. Okay. But I want to get to the point though I want to get to, which is 1972, because the Black Political Convention the following year, 1972, is where we see the thing I think we want to just discuss for a second before I go to Shirley Chisholm's own words in The Black Scholar, and end with that a couple of years after this. Let me see where I'm looking here. Let me get you. Here we go. Page 126. Nation Time. Here we are at Nation Time. One of the ongoing questions during the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. You got Black elected officials. You got Coleman Young, who's then a state senator out of Michigan, becomes the mayor of Detroit eventually. You got Richard Hatcher hosting in Gary. You got all these Black elected officials. Percy Sutton and them are there representing New York. You got people all over the country and beyond the country. And then you got all the non-elected officials, the Black nationalists, the Pan-Africanists, the community builders, the church people, everybody in Gary at this huge Black political convention, 1972. Why? Because you're dealing with the question of the election of 1972 and which way do we go? Where do we go from here? This is March 1972. March 1972. So we're talking about 52 years ago. 52 years ago this month while we're sitting right here. 3-day Queen Mother Moore, reparations. And again, we're going to talk more about this article that Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote in the New York Times. We're going to have to, because I see now that the descendants of slaves has come out and said, we endorse this. I'm saying this is chaos theory. This is chaos theory. I understand the trauma, I understand the pain, and we must embrace that and understand that. I also understand tactically that that is a dead end. Very important for us to understand that. This isn't my opinion. It is an informed analysis based on a deeper awareness of the momentum of our memory in terms of our long reparation struggle. But Queen Mother Moore was there, Gary, in March 1972. But this is what Leonard Moore writes. He says, one of the ongoing questions during the convention was whether or not it would endorse a presidential candidate. Anybody. Specifically now, would the MBPC express its support for Shirley Chisholm, the only African-American presidential candidate in the 1972 election? Manhattan Borough President Percy Sutton, Chisholm's biggest supporter in Gary, because Shirley Chisholm did not come to the National Black Political Convention. We'll talk about that why in a minute. Encouraged the convention to endorse her candidacy as a means of solidifying Black voters. Jesse Jackson also voiced his support while suggesting, in addition, that Black folks needed to form an independent political party. Okay, let me pause here, because this is how you're going to tell the difference between a social structure vehicle and a governance structure vehicle. To me, Shirley, a movie about the 1972 presidential campaign, and like I said, I haven't watched it all. I'll finish watching it later today. It seems to me that the center of that has to be Shirley Chisholm, but Life and Times means that a center of Shirley Chisholm's campaign, if you're talking about governance, one of the centers of this vehicle has to be Gary, 1972, March 1972. Not a flyby where you see some quick slashes at the sexism and some quick slashes at the racism and some nice hip music as an underleaf soundtrack. No, and it isn't a documentary. This ain't Eyes on the Prize. But to understand the politics of it, understand that you have a Black community that's trying to create a we in a hostile political environment, rife with the smoke from the 1960s, in the middle of a Black power movement that is continuing to have a continuing thrust that itself has been set upon by external forces, from counterintelligence program to everybody else. And into this maelstrom, there is a governance structure, debate, discussion, knock down, drag out, attempt to build consensus around how to create Black political power at a critical moment when there's an extreme vulnerability, not only in the United States, but in the world as it relates to world politics and U.S. politics. 1972. They're trying to build a plane while flying it. We continue. During the intense debate over endorsing presidential candidates, Ohio introduced a resolution against endorsement. No surprise there, Carl Stokes. While Louisiana delegates were in favor of endorsing. Watch the documentary Nation Time. Says, sensing that the convention would not endorse, Jesse quickly jumped up on that bandwagon by stating an endorsement would, quote, violate the spirit of our hosts. So Jesse's reading the room. Shirley Chisholm's not known in that room. She's got the publicity from Jed and Ebony, and she has some visibility because she is the first Black woman elected to Congress, and she's running for president. So people know her that way. But in terms of this slow accretive work beyond New York and the networks, which isn't a question of gender, but a question of politics, in the sense that that's the case for most people in Black politics. At this point, there's no national figure as such. And one of the reasons Jesse is there is because he's hoping to be that figure. He's not elected to anything, but he carries the mantle of Martin King. If you fast forward 12 years to the Democratic National Convention of 1984, our time has come, that famous speech Jesse gave, which is still one of, if not the greatest speech ever given at any political convention of the two major parties. Barack Obama wouldn't even make the top 10 of those speeches, by the way. Jesse 88 would come in after Jesse 84, but I'm not here. I don't want the chocolate wonder to catch a stray today, because it's not necessary. Anybody with 2 ears and 2 eyes can kind of do that for yourself. But at any rate, the point is that 12 years later, Jesse Jackson in 1984, our time has come. You see Coretta Scott King there. You see Rosa Parks there. The idea is that Jesse inherits the mantle of Martin King. That's why Operation Breadbasket, they actually make buttons with the two of them on any. This battle in 1972 is who's going to lead Black America, who's going to pull together a Black America to lead all that we carried. Where do we go from here? And in that leadership, who's going to emerge as the dominant voices? Now, Shirley Chisholm has come out of an already historic political presence into a larger political presence, fueled by women, white women, and some Black women, and Black pride. But the politics of it is much more complicated than that, and we continue. Says this, because Jesse didn't realize they're not going to endorse her. They don't know her like that. Are they against her? Are they for her? You look at a movie, you'll think this is about gender. Stop it. Let's continue, because it ain't just that. Ironically, during the debate, Chisholm's name, quote, never came up during the discussion. They talk about whether to endorse a presidential candidate, and Shirley Chisholm's name never came up. But this next sentence should get everybody who think they know pause. The resolution not to endorse was overwhelmingly passed by the convention. Again, Black independent political party. They're talking about having a Black independent political party. Ron Walters is there. Ron Daniels is there. All these people there. But this next thing should give us some room to think. The resolution not to endorse was overwhelmingly passed by the convention, and Black women, such as Coretta Scott King and Dorothy Height, president of the National Council of Negro Women, agreed. King believed that the convention was about issues and not individuals, especially since they were trying to move toward broad-based leadership. Here's a quote from Coretta Scott King from the time. She says, quote, I can appreciate what Shirley is doing, and I support Shirley's efforts. I've talked with Shirley, and she knows that. But personally, I am not in a position to endorse anybody at this time. I take the position that this should be an issue-oriented thing, because what you've got here is a lot of Black politicians who are committed and have to be committed to certain things, and you put them in a bad position, end quote. That's Coretta Scott King. When you look at the Nation Time documentary, you'll see at the opening of this 3-day conference, you've got Coretta Scott King sitting shoulder to shoulder, side by side with Betty Shabazz as they open. And they sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, and you see them talking to each other, and you realize in that glimpse, so you want to make a movie about that. No, I'm sorry. No. Wait till we get the rest of our money up, and Nubian Narrative will handle that. We don't need no more movies from social structure entities who have different commitments than we have. Our commitment is to we as African people, and beyond that to the larger humanity who also have centers of we to build our common we. What our commitment is not to is a diversity, equity, and inclusion model of liberation. The DEI model of liberation is get a few Black people in the room, pitch some things, and then make a movie with half your shirt off, or basically naked, except maybe a little thin piece of drawers between your legs. So therefore, you can say you've made progress, and now your children are confused, because all they're going to do is watch the movie, if that. They damn sure not going to class. They're too busy playing basketball and whatever else, basketball, spades, and video games. They are too busy doing other things. So if you get their attention at all, it's going to be for a 30-second TikTok video. And if you're very lucky and there's nothing else to do and you've been held hostage, a Netflix movie. But the important work of recovery, the work we will never concede, the clean glasses we must pour, involves work like what we're doing right now. I'm going to try to wind this up in a second. So you see this. Let me go to Dorothy Height for a second. Dorothy Height stated that from an organizational standpoint, this is Mary McLeod Bethune's youngin'. You understand? And when you snatch Mary McLeod Bethune, now you're talking about Nanny Helen Burroughs. Now you're talking about colored woman in a white world, Mary Church Terrell. I'm just giving some names in the sense that, see, what will happen is, this is the magical Negro theory of documentaries and filmmaking. They pull one Negro out and make them the magical Negro, and then you ask yourself, where did they come from? All that we carried. Where is the here we are talking about going from? Can we get some momentum? Remember, you know how long Black women been organizing since the first Black female tried to figure out how I'm going to feed this little human that came out from between my legs. That is the first relationship in human existence. The first relationship is male-female. The next relationship is female and child. Please understand that we have not created, to my knowledge, in human society, a perfect social system. And that as we grapple toward better systems than we have, we need all of our experiences to pour into that. Not the warped memories of a little group of humans who migrated to Africa centuries ago, millennia ago, and end up trapped between two ice ages in Western Eurasia, whose cultural logic now dictates how we even look at ourselves. Throw those movies away as narrative frames and come back to the concepts that you brought with you, that you've been able to sustain even as you have adapted them to ongoing circumstances. We continue. Dorothy Height stated that from an organizational standpoint, the National Council of Negro Women would not endorse candidates, quote, but rather work to awaken women to action and get them to work in their communities. I personally don't think the purpose of this convention is to endorse candidates, end quote, she said. Now, I'm sure all of these women were portrayed in this movie. I'm sure Coretta Scott King and Dorothy Height were included. I haven't watched the whole movie yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing how they are portrayed and how their conversation gives more texture to the idea that it's like women versus men. Again, it is women versus men in Greek mythology, in Roman mythology, in every damn conflict Europe has had, and it is women versus men too often in other cultures as well. However, how you resolve those moments, what your objectives are very different depending on the cultures you're in. What I don't want to see is a blackface version of white gender conflict. Anyway, says this. This is where I think is very interesting as well. I'll end with this. Richard Hatcher, the mayor, he says, although Chisholm was invited to Gary to address the convention on Sunday, she never showed up. Her official excuse was that she was campaigning in Florida, but she never planned to attend, despite the many times convention organizers reached out to her. Quote, this is her speaking, I was not present at the Gary convention, end quote, she says. Quote, I didn't intend to present myself to a group of people who were just going to slash me left and right because they would laugh at me. I knew that, and I didn't want to be wasting my time to have them laughing at me. I was on a mission. I saw myself on a mission. And that was all there was to it, end quote. But here's the thing. The critics started coming for her. With little or no support at Gary, the Chisholm campaign was virtually ignored. Carl Stokes, that mayor of Cleveland again, actually made the point of no endorsement early in the 72 Black Strategy Sessions, and his view carried today at Gary. In his autobiography, Stokes said, look, Shirley Chisholm was on an ego trip in the presidential primaries. That view prevailed, but it was rough at first. He said, we've got 4 more years of Nixon. We out here playing games. The National Black Political Convention shouldn't consider her as a serious candidate. She got elected to Congress with fewer votes than any of the other 434 members of the House of Representatives. Was that animated by being a hater? I believe that that's probably part of it. You're a hater. She had a lot of press. Was it animated by political instincts? Absolutely. I think that too. I think many of these things are true, but here's where I want to end. That was Carl Stokes, the mayor of Cleveland, one of those 2 Black elected officials as mayors of big American cities. How about the second one, the one who's the host of the Gary Convention? This is what Richard Hatcher said about the Chisholm campaign. This is what Leonard Moore writes. Despite the ambivalence of many of her fellow Black elected officials, Hatcher believed that if she would have showed up at Gary, the convention would have endorsed her because of what her candidacy represented. Here's the quote, end quote, from Richard Hatcher, the mayor of Gary. Recent ancestor. Richard Hatcher writes, quote, I absolutely believe that if Shirley Chisholm walked into that hall, just walked into that hall, she wouldn't have had to say a word, and the entire convention would have gone up in smoke, because there was such a great sense of pride that a Black woman had the courage and the fortitude to announce that she was running for the highest office in the country. That's not a Netflix. It could be a Netflix movie, except that don't serve the interests of those who put the interest of a dying nation state before your interests. So I want to end with this. 3 years later, 1975, Black scholar, Black politics, what course in 1976? You see, featuring this issue, John Conyers, Ronald Walters, William Strickland, Imamu Amiri Baraka, Shirley Chisholm, Richard Hatcher, Imari Obadeli. These are the people whose names we should know. I mean, I could go through each one of them, and those of you who know, and so I won't do that. But I want to go to the interview with Shirley Chisholm, which is right before the one from Imamu Baraka, and read to you what Shirley Chisholm's political philosophy was in the wake of her presidential run, in a little article she did called Black Politicians and the American Electorate by Shirley Chisholm. She said, some time ago, I said that if certain aspects of this country do not change quicker and more readily than change has come in the past, we will experience large-scale revolution in the streets. I do not necessarily want to see that day come, but I am constantly reminded of what Malcolm once said about freedom. Quote, you get your freedom by letting your enemy know that you'll do anything to get your freedom. Then you'll get it. It's the only way you'll get it, end quote. In many ways, Black Americans have served notice on white-oriented institutions in place after place throughout the country. There's a great deal of revolutionary rhetoric. There's a great deal of talk about Black nationalism. There is, in short, much talk about change by any means necessary. But when we look at the present-day conditions of Black Americans in a historical context, all that we carry, y'all, we are forced to conclude that there's relatively little change in our condition, and we are forced to realize that there are relatively few means that we can use to change our position within the society. This society, Shirley Chisholm writes, is fully capitalistic. At an earlier point in the development of the country, that may have been a good condition. Capitalism may have been the prime incentive towards national growth. But if it is hard for those of us who are Black to forget that it was capitalism and the Industrial Revolution that created slavery, that it was capitalism that almost totally destroyed the original inhabitants of this country, and it is hard to avoid seeing that it is capitalism that prevents capitalism from distributing the wealth of the country to all of its citizens. Oh, Shirley Chisholm, I know it's probably going to be a scene in there with George Wallace when she goes visit him in the hospital, and then he helps her by lending his voice to getting the minimum wage raised. I know there's going to be some, you got to get those highlights in about the life of Shirley Chisholm. And I'm sure there's a scene in there where she's going to grapple with the question of capitalism. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think there is a scene where she's challenging Huey Newton, like, where do you work again? It's good for a laugh, but let's be serious for a moment. Movies are a point of entry to understand what we're talking about, unless we're not going to be serious. And let's be very clear about the American Negro. If the American Negro don't get serious very quick, we're going to get left in the dust of history. A race, an entire race of children. But it's okay. We won't keep pouring these clean glasses of water. I want to skip forward to what she says. She quotes Julian Bond. She says, Black politicians, this then is the society in which the Black American politician finds himself. Interesting choice of words. I hope the editors didn't change herself to himself. Shirley Chisholm writes, whether the Black politician represents an urban, rural, or suburban district, whether they represent a white district, a Black district, or a racially split district, there are certain things that we should never forget. The first is that we are Black. Ooh. And we should never forget it is because, look, and then she writes, quote, and he should never forget it because his opponents won't forget, nor will the electorate. And so she then offers a 6-point things to remember taken from Julian Bond in the first issue of the Black Politician. I got that issue around here somewhere. These are kind of hard to get these days. This is what Shirley Chisholm writes, quoting Julian Bond. Number 1, Black politicians must remember that social, economic, educational, political, and physical segregation and discrimination will fill a very real need for the white majority. That's why I got my Tennessee State shirt on today. I got my Tennessee State shirt on today because on Thursday night on Roland Martin's show on Black Star Network, I called out the NAACP. I'm calling them out again because these hillbillies in Tennessee voted earlier this week to dismantle the Tennessee State University Board of Trustees because, you know, the accounting, the billions of dollars owed HBCUs in this country, and that's just a nominal accounting, include a couple of billion for Tennessee State. And then the white nationalist governor, Bill Lee of Tennessee, said, okay, we're going to give Tennessee State a lot of money. We may give them, you know, half $500 million. Okay, but guess what? Tennessee State has a board. Now the hillbilly horde, these racists in Tennessee, they dismantling the Tennessee State Board of Trustees. So if they give them some money, they're going to decide how to spend it. The current president of Tennessee State, Dr. Glover, Glenda Baskin Glover, is a certified public accountant in addition to having a doctorate. But they moved her out of the presidency. Now, y'all saw what happened at Lincoln, the sister who took her life and said that she was being bullied by the white president. They just cleared him. That silly board of compliant Negroes just cleared him. He'd been reinstated at Lincoln in Missouri. We are facing real issues. Where is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People? Where's the National Urban League? Where's all these organizations? These legacy organizations who are not even what they were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, when they were writing in the pages of the Black Scholar, when they were writing in Black World, the Negro Digest, when they were forced to come to meetings like the National Black Political Convention. Well, I'll tell you where they are. They're places that are good for their image. You know, they give awards for that kind of thing. The thing, you know, these corporate entities, these things that move against Black self-determination. We got to fund our own liberation, even as we make the reparations demand. But these hillbillies have decided that they're going to basically try to steal from themselves. The comptroller in Tennessee, Jason Mumpower, that MAGA Mumpower, he the one that tried to break up what was going in Mason, Tennessee and West Tennessee when they put in the auto plant. And you want to take it away from the ability to empower these Black people in that community. This is a serious game we're playing now. Is third party politics important? Are independent candidates important in 2024? Absolutely. But if we take all that we carried, if we get the momentum of memory, then when we ask ourselves, where do we go from here? We can learn from the times that we have proposed these things before at critical moments. Let me finish up. Shirley Chisholm says, number one, being white feels a real need for this white majority. Number two of 6. That appeals to justice and fair play are outmoded and useless when power, financial gain, and prestige are at stake. Absolutely. You see, they're tearing up the Supreme Court right now. Power's at stake. We don't give a damn even about precedent or the law. We got the numbers. Let's run a Boston. But you're going to tear your little funky bench up, John Boy Roberts. Number 3, that positions of segregation and discrimination will be adhered to until change is forced through coercion, threats, power, or violence. Shirley Chisholm thinking with Julian Bond, drawing attention to what Black politicians must always come in mind. To me, this is a checklist for Black politicians to this day. Number 4, that initiative for Black political education and organization must come from within the Negro community and must be sustained on a day-by-day basis. Now, I don't know how this movie, I'm sure we're going to have the white women cheering and crying and in solidarity with their sister. All that is a beautiful dream. Imagination is silly. Go around willy-nilly. Yeah, that's your imagination, but it ain't even informed. Your dream ain't informed by reality. You better go do some studying. Go check out Valencia Watkins on that subject, or Kenora Hudson Weems, or you go talk to some people who have actually studied this, or better yet, go find your nana and have that conversation. Go have that conversation about the solidarity politics, okay? And the lack thereof. And the ones that did engage in deep solidarity politics still was not without complications. I was thinking about that in listening to Joyce and Dory Ladner in an interview they did, I think it was at the Library of Congress. And they were talking about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the critique of sexism in SNCC. And Dr. Ladner, Joyce Ladner, kind of said, yeah, sexism, okay. That's those white feminists. We were all in there together. We were all working it out together. And believe me, in governance formations, I'm not aware of any formation that was more committed to not looking away from difficult conversations than the women and men of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But what it wasn't was an attempt to import these white feminist views into the space. I'm not talking about Black people having necessary conversations and doing the hard work of building community. I'm talking about what Shirley Chisholm is talking about. Number 5, that the geographical distribution of Negroes makes Negro-white coalitions desirable, but only when based on racial self-interest and genuine equality between the coalescing groups. But, and finally, number 6, that Black racial self-interest, race consciousness, and racial solidarity must always be paramount in the needs and words of the Black political animal. When self-interest is forgotten, organized racism will continue to dominate and frustrate the best organized political actions of any Black political unit, and it will leave it powerless and defenseless. She says, in summary, what Julian Bond is saying is that for our freedom struggle to advance in the political arena, Black politicians have to accept their Blackness. Look, don't be scared of these companies that's giving y'all money, NAA. You need to be in the street in Nashville. I was a 21-year-old kid, student body president of Tennessee State University, when we came out against the whole Tennessee government. You're gonna try to break our campus and pump white students into a campus and change our racial identity. We're gonna fight you with both ends. We was down at the legislature so much it wasn't even funny. We marched down Jefferson Street. The 5th students would join us, and we would be in the streets. We was in the newspapers every day, on the evening news, all of that. And then we inserted ourselves in an electoral campaign. 1986, the governor of Tennessee was up for election, and the Democratic candidate was a good old boy named Ned Ray McWhirter. We met with Ned Ray McWhirter, vetted the candidates, and then endorsed Ned Ray McWhirter for governor of the state of Tennessee in exchange for his agreement that if he was elected, he was going to pump millions of dollars into Tennessee State's campus. After he was elected, I'll never forget, I got a call in my dorm in Epps. No, I wasn't living in Epps Hall at the time. I got a call in my dorm from the governor's office. Is this Greg Carr? It is. And the governor would like to see you. No problem. Put on my suit and tie, went down to the Tennessee, to the Capitol, to the governor's office, and sat across from Ned Ray McWhirter. He said, I intend on making good on my promise, Mr. Carr. I said, I hope you do, because you know next time I come down here, I'm going to have everybody with me if you don't. And when they opened the new student center, my father, to the day he made transition, said one of the proudest moments of his life was when he, Ned Ray McWhirter, the former governor of Tennessee, got up and said the appropriations that went toward this building and other buildings on this campus and things that we pumped into Tennessee State, he said it was the Carr boys. Me, I was student body president. A couple years later, my brother was student body president. They took over the building, the downtown campus of Tennessee State. That's a whole nother story. He said them Carr boys are one of the reasons that we have these resources here today. I made a promise. I'm going to tell y'all something. You ain't got to like politicians, but damn it, stop being a punk. NAACP, where are you? Urban League, where are you? All these Negroes that give each other awards now for Black excellence being pumped up by Target and, all these companies still got the guilt money and don't want you to set fire to them because they were scared of what you might have done 4 summers ago. Worthless. This is what I'm here to tell y'all right now. Shirley Chisholm is speaking from the ancestral realm when she ends in the final paragraph, and she says, in doing that, being founded in our own Blackness, we may be able to start a new political movement in this country. Chisholm writes, Julian noted in the same article that, quote, this new movement must address itself to solving America's white problem, to developing a new consciousness in the Black and white communities, end quote. Final sentence, Shirley Chisholm writes, this is the challenge confronting Black politicians. So, as we kind of wind up today, we talk about all that we carried. It is our obligation. If our writers are convening, if our people are convening, if our conversation around cultural meaning making is convening, like the one that's going to convene in Brooklyn shortly, we have to remember that this isn't about self-aggrandizement. This isn't about self-promotion. This is about collective work and responsibility. This isn't about telling a story part way and watching the Freaknik documentary. What started as HBCU kids who couldn't go home for a week, didn't have the resources, having a little cookout in the park, Piedmont Park, the DC club. If y'all know about HBCUs, you know about the state clubs and the city clubs, everything from the Tennessee club to the LA club. They got the LA club in at Howard. That's Louisiana and Los Angeles, following the migration patterns. You got the Memphis club in Tennessee State. You got, they had a DC club in the AUC. And so they had a little cookout. In fact, the original name that came out was Black Spring Break. And as they described in the documentary, these people who are now my age, we talking about the 80s and 90s, they said, this is the period of course, the great Nile Rodgers, of course. Don't say chic, lay freak, say chic, lay freak. Freaknik. It wasn't about being naked and pop that coochie and all that stuff that Uncle Luke and them brought up with that incredibly powerful pull of Africana cultural meaning making, stripped of movement and memory and injected into the bloodstream of the youth strata in our governance formations, where unsupervised young people, which you should be able to be unsupervised. After all, the original Black Spring Breakers were unsupervised. They're just young people cooking out in the park. And then it starts taking off, and that's fine, because that's what ends up happening. Then the class stratifications begin to emerge, and then you got Black elected officials calling Black police on Black children, and they all out in the streets. Here you are twerking, or booty shaking as they used to call it, and here come the police. Now it's a mess. Okay, we can parse through that, come through that, because at the time, those of you remember, where do we go? You go to Atlanta for Freaknik, you come to Philly for the Black Greek picnic, maybe Virginia Beach for that Black weekend, until that got broken up, where Chuck D puts that in Welcome to the Terror Dome, talks about that, right? What happened in Virginia Beach, the Black Biker Weekend in South Carolina. Are people not going to Daytona Beach to throw up all over the beach with the white kids? Atlanta turned into the place where people came, but it came out of a different kind of formation, and all that's fine. But then you make a documentary in 2024 where you're showing all the booty shaking after a quick drive-by of its origins, and then you got Negroes, my friends, talking about how this was an expression of Black excellence. Oh my God. I understand. I do understand. Your memory is missing. Your memory is missing, Killer Mike. Your memory is missing, Jermaine Dupri. Your memory is missing, 21 Savage. Your memory is missing, CeeLo. You're taking out the cultural meaning making, but you removed it from the movement and memory. And so therefore, you're celebrating the modality without understanding the longer arc of an intentional ways of knowing and governance formations out of which that emerges. Are they perfect? No, but they must be reattached. All that we carried. Where do we go from here? Where is the here? You've reduced the whole concept of convening to music, booty shaking, and all this kind of thing. And then at the end, and have the audacity to then say, it was our Wakanda, an entire race of children. So what do? You don't condemn. You pour the clean glass of water. So I think that's where we can probably pause for today.
I interviewed the director yesterday, and he said it was a music documentary. So they didn't have, it's a music documentary. It's not what we expected to be. And so I don't think it had the depth, because that wasn't what the people who put it together.
Well, help me understand. If it's a music documentary, why the hell are these talking heads in it? Because they weren't talking about the music. Okay.
Just telling you what he told me yesterday. I didn't press it. It's Foolishness Friday. I didn't have a whole lot of I wasn't there. I didn't bring the man on. He was already a little perturbed because we were late getting to him. So I was like, oh, you don't really listen to the show. Okay. So we'll make it brief and honor that, and then return to foolishness. So there's that. But as you were talking about the NAACP from day one on Sirius XM, that's kind of been my rallying cry. Like, I feel like, we make our money on Urban View through advertising,
yes.
But we turn down more advertising than we take because the value is in the audience. So I have to kowtow to you, I'm gonna say what I say. I don't censor. If you don't want to advertise, that's fine. Go with God. There's plenty of people out there that want to be in community with us, right? So
yes.
either we value ourselves or we don't. And if your whole brand or your whole institution or organization is built on kowtowing to other people's whims, then you aren't serving the people. So the very thing you're getting money for, which is, I'm out here fighting for Black liberation, you're absolutely not doing because you're afraid. And they never ask you to do that, by the way. So you are assuming in exchange for this money that your fealty, that your submission is part of the contract, when maybe it's just the opposite. And why don't you try it? And then if they pull the money out, you got a big enough platform to talk about them. I feel like we have been addled so deeply that we forgot where the power resides. We forgot who has the power. And it is disappointing. But when you've been, I don't know what it's like to get $1 million a year salary, Dr. Carr. I'm just going to confess that. Maybe it makes you so comfortable that you don't want to jeopardize that, because your lifestyle and the hobnobbing and the elbow rubbing have put you in a position where the preservation of that is more important than the mission statement on your company's website.
Come on. But you recognize the potential power, because you realize that your only value to the people who are funding you is that they can use you as a proxy for the people they're scared of. In other words,
is that de facto or de jure? You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like they have put that into the mix.
Oh, no question.
Like that.
It's important. It's interesting you raise that, because I found myself in the wake of this affirmative action article, because I had to write something. Now we got to write something. We like you and I, we've been talking about this. Something's got to be written to accentuate what we've been doing. And so I started rereading Randy Mattori's book, Stigma and Culture. And it's a very important work, because what he identifies is that once you have been stigmatized as a group, the struggle within the group, once you believe that stigma, is to try to escape the group. You can't escape it. And Thomas Gibson writes in the foreword of the book, Stigma and Culture, he says, everything these individuals do, everything they do is regarded by the wider society as either an expression of their innate racial inferiority or as an eccentric exception to it. So in other words, the idea is that these Black people are beyond redemption. They're not human. So, and what Randy grew up, his father was a surgeon at Howard for 30 years. He grew up on the campus of Howard University. He's an anthropologist by training. He won all these awards for this book because he said, I went to Howard to interview faculty, alumni, students, staff. I know a lot of people. I'm interviewing them. He said, and I went there expecting to find this kind of Pan-African expression. He said, what I found, however, is something very different. When you have internalized the stigma, Blackness, I found the African Caribbeans, the continental Africans. I heard y'all talking about Godfrey. This idea that
you didn't hear me talking about.
No, I'm talking about the brother, the Gullah Geechee, but which I think is fascinating. Look here, let me be very clear about this. The language of Africa is in the mouth of the Sea Islands. You cannot press that into the language of your master. I don't care how many students you teach at Harvard or Stanford or Howard or anywhere else. At the end of the day, that is the language of Africa. We have Africanized our spaces. There is no such thing as an American. If there is, please show it to me. I want to see it. I want to have that conversation day by day, moment by moment, place by place. What you are aspiring to doesn't exist, and you shouldn't be aspiring to it. That's a conversation for another day. But the point is this. What Mattori is saying is that when you put us all together, now the fight becomes, how do I avoid last place? And that's where the tensions come. And in fact, the name of the book is Stigma and Culture, Last Place Anxiety in Black America. I'm bringing that up for this reason. Once you get a couple of nickels to rub together, that system that gives you those nickels, the people who don't believe you're human, but who will kiki in your face, they either think you are an expression of the innate racial inferiority, pop that coochie, doo-doo brown, or an eccentric exception to it. This is Black excellence. And I speak like you speak. So therefore, you understand that I'm interpreting this to you. But ultimately, everything you do is still encompassed in the stigma. The only thing you have to give to these people is something that reinforces what they think about your people. So if you want to impress me, go make a movie about the white boys getting drunk in the 80s and 90s to today in Daytona Beach. Produce that, but you can't. Why? They're not going to give you money for that. They're going to give you money to reinforce what they think of you. Don't be, that's it. That's it. And please understand, the way I'm talking now, as I calm down, the way we have these conversations, ain't nothing new about this. The only thing new about it is today. We have been having this conversation since the ships rolled up. And one of these days, we're going to recover our memory. And then we talk about all that we carried. It ain't going to be a trauma sack.
Come on. That is the goal. That is good. Can you hold up the book? The Shirley Chisholm?
Yeah, this is the one. This is the one I'm talking about.
No, that's the one with the points in it that you were. Yeah. Okay, let me write that down.
Shirley Chisholm, or this one we just talking about. The one Shirley Chisholm. Hold on. The one that's talking about her politics in the wake of the meeting. This is called The Defeat of Black Power, which I don't. Again, I'm reading it to make sure I know the sources. And most of these things I was quoting, I got those original documents. But, the analysis, they always, Black Power wasn't defeated because we're here. And then Stigma and Culture, I recommend this book. This is a difficult read, but Randy Maturi's book, Stigma and Culture, Last Place Anxiety in Black America, is an excellent book because he's looking internally. In fact, he's got a whole chapter on here on Chapter 3, Islands Are Not Isolated, Schools, Scholars, and the Political Economy of Gullah Geechee Ethnicity. I mean, this is what I'm saying. It's time to, these drive-by hot takes got to end. At some point, we got to have a different kind of conversation.
We do. So we created the Onyx Society. Pam Keith, former JAG, former congressional candidate from Florida, came on the show this week. I don't know when we're going to post a video, but we created the Onyx Society inside Nubia. And I'm looking at it like for the next 5 years, let's put together the framework. And she put as one of the things, equity in funding for HBCUs.
Yes.
Which is something we all could agree with. Yeah. That's at least something, right? Then put together the script and the blueprint and like APEC hand over the legislation to the people like Jasmine Crockett, who could walk it in and like make a case for it, because how do you explain why there isn't any equity? Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's an easy get right now. And you just talked about it today. So I'm like, well, it should be an easy get if we have the right strategy.
I agree. And that's what, and you're absolutely right. And what we can't do, again, this is what makes this article Nicole wrote so problematic. At the end, she's talking about the threat of the attack on affirmative action, what it could do to HBCUs. But just before that, you're making the case for lineage-based reparations, saying that only people whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States should get reparations. And now it's okay. So what do you do at the historically Black colleges where those children are from every part of the African world? You telling the kids people came from Haiti to disenroll, the kids who came from Nigeria? Listen, don't talk anymore until you can defend your positions in conversation. We should have a governance conversation. How you gonna have equity for something, and then now you're gonna pick on which Black gets to stay? What the hell are you talking about?
Exactly. But in this world of abject ignorance, and I sat in that seat. So I'm just gonna say, 16 years of the Daily News, in my 20s, knowing nothing, I'm handed a pen to write a column, an opinion piece out with my little picture on it. Every week, I'm producing a column with no tertiary knowledge. Like, and I'm saying I did okay, but my goodness, what would it look like today? What would that column look like today with all that I know? So we're limited, and because the spaces that we're in mostly, they don't give a damn.
No.
So any Black, how you hand a 20-year-old the pen and write a column? Yeah, and who's gonna say no to that? And then who's not going to think that they're exceptional? Who's not going to think that they're exceptional? So I'm grateful for all of the sitting down I've done and been sat down to even acknowledge that I don't know enough to even be in that space. But no one's going to tell themselves that. And I'm sure, Nicole's not sitting there saying, I'm going to write a horrible piece. I think she thinks she did the best thing. You know what I'm saying? But
I'm not coming for Nicole. I'm not coming for Nicole.
Right. But like today, what I'm saying, what's that book? So when we build out this thing, let's make sure that we cover, and I'm gonna send you the plan before we put it up, and make sure that we are right in this moment, as right as we can be. Plans fail for lack of counsel. With many advisors, they succeed. We don't have enough advisors, and too many arrogant people think they know. And it's arrogance. It's arrogance and ignorance, which I think is the disease that infects this world more than anything else. But it's curable. It's all curable.
It is curable through community. You're right. We have to be in community. Yeah, I mean, in a situation like that, you can tell when people have allowed themselves to be selected out from a group as opposed to writing within a group. Because I can guarantee you, if this were the 1970s, and I'm not saying go back, an article like that would have come, and then when it came out, the invitation would have come from the Black Scholar or Black World. Now, come and be in dialogue, because we got these other 8 people, and we're going to have this conversation, and we're going to publish, and we can do that again. I would love nothing more than for Nicole coming here. Hey, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about this, because you need to explain this to us.
I'll invite her.
Okay, in that case,
I'm going to invite Dr. Darity as well. Let's
please invite Sandy Darity.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for oh my God, am I ready? Yes, I am. Okay, thank you. I love you so much.
Love you. Right. Enjoy the conference. I can't wait to hear about it.
Okay, I'll
try. Say hi to Paul. Paul's supposed to be there, Coach.
I will give him a hug too.
Yeah, please. Oh wow. Hey, look, I'm gonna say less. Love you.
I love you too. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your week.